Alright folks, you have an original subject, you have thought about your sources and written about those. We're up to writing the final paper, and I just thought I'd give you some advice that I give to my campus classes. There's nothing terribly elaborate in this, as you'll see from my very plain Jane presentations here on a Word file. But I usually try to emphasize to students that when you're writing these, you want to do more than what you might have done in previous class, and that is that you should appeal to the emotions of a reader, to the pathos. If you take another video, and a word I've used there as a strategy, a way to think about writing this assignment. Introductions can be pretty short. You don't have to dwell on them a long time because we want to hear your argument. You want to give essentials. You have to give context, explain your purpose, hook us. In this case, we have a special kind of hook because this assignment has you making an argument, and you want to appeal to a reader, usually an emotional appeal. And yes, you can have good emotional appeals. Go back through your book. Emotional appeals aren't always bad. The students will think they're bad because they may have gotten an assignment in high school where they were told, oh, all emotional appeals are bad. Not so. Emotional appeals include your self-interest as well as your readers. Look, what interests you in your topic? You chose it for a reason, presumably not just because it was handed to you. The reader you've got to consider is not the president, not Superman. It's college folks just like you, right? Or people who are interested, can be educated about your topic, and who want you to tell them about it. But we can't snap our fingers and make stuff happen. It really isn't impossible to interest us, but it's not so hard to discourage us either. Start out with an understanding of the audience, and knowing that persuasion really has to happen. We live in a day and age when people don't believe in this, or that words can matter. But if we actually take a look historically, it has been the case that people have been persuaded, not just by fear. They've been persuaded by language and words. It used to be in the old days that Abe Lincoln would have long debates with Douglas and others to try and persuade people about an opinion. These days it all has to happen in sound bites, but we're working on an older formula, and that formula is logic and appeal to an audience's emotion. You can do it. Here's an example. I don't want this to see this repeated or a version of this repeated. I want you to think about the spirit of this and take it to heart as you write your paper. A student wrote this version for an essay, and I'll just read the beginning of it. Most college students have one clear and simple goal in mind: succeed and graduate. He's thinking about you. He's thinking about all college students. He's trying to appeal to us in his beginning, to try and get us involved in the subject. Students usually don't have, he says, the time or energy to care about how online information at a school is stored, grades, transcripts, even email. Why should college students care about information security? Because they can and should do something about it. He's also promising that we can participate in this, and that's one of the better parts, that he has the knowledge that he's going to impart to us about how to make things better. It's so rewarding when you get an essay like this because he's already thinking in terms of what he has to offer, how he can appeal to you and get you involved in a subject. That's what you need to do. Don't do it exactly like this, but take the spirit of it. Here's another one. For the non-hunter, the only time you might think about hunting is when it comes up in the news. A tamed lion appears in the news because he's drawn out by poachers willing to spend a few $1,000s for a cruel kill. In fact, this is exactly how my grandmother talks about how my grandmother talks about it, I should say, when she thinks of hunters, which makes our conversations interesting because I'm a hunter and I care about the environment quite a lot. Here's what my grandmother, or even the person who never thinks about hunters at all, might be interested by and like to know about my attitude toward the wilderness. You can see how this is trying to disprove a myth or a stereotype, and that's a central goal because it gets us beyond fallacies and presuppositions into the real subject. And I like the fact that it's couched in this conversation with a grandmother, because that's how close you should be. The metaphor here for any kind of good argument is that you're sitting at the table with the other person, not that you're shouting at them, not that you're poking them in the eye, and not that you're threatening them, but that you're having a discussion, and you want to use your language to be as persuasive as you can. You can still hook a reader while you're setting context. Do this somewhere early in the essay and the exam. Do it briefly, such as saying any of these, but don't repeat these verbatim. Again, take the spirit of them. First became interested or studied this when, my family cares about this because, or in my work I see this. Or how about this one? Diane Ravitch is in your book, and you might notice that in the Viewpoints chapter, she changes her mind. Does that make her less authoritative because she did? She actually was very close to a subject, and yet she changed her mind and improved her thinking on a topic. That actually makes her more authoritative in my book, and it will in most people's book. So you might actually walk us through that change. It doesn't take much to appeal to readers, even to surprise their expectations, and to build your own credibility or ethos on a topic. Your readers are interested in these, will be looking for them. One of the basic ways you do this is to show that you've read about your topic and care about it. What builds your credibility? Your involvement with the topic as well as your research. The opposite also expresses the truth. Those who are uninvolved and haven't researched a topic have no credibility. Avoid assumptions that are too confident about a reader. I've had students assume that they know everything about me and try to write something to a teacher they really don't have at all. Don't do that. Assumptions have to be spelled out clearly, and your textbook says this more clearly than I could. Avoid calling for a change like you flip a switch at home, because that's not how change happens. America is a struggle with argument at its core, and we've made improvements over time, but it hasn't happened as if we're snapping our fingers calling for a check or flipping on a switch. Nice metaphors. Avoid being wildly impractical. Avoid only appealing to emotions for your case instead of emotions plus reasons. And certainly avoid insulting us, such as saying, obviously, or any fool can see. I think I've said enough there. And since I go through this in class, I usually have students saying, oh, I get it. I get what we're really supposed to do. And I'll remind them, too, as we're going through this, that don't leave that just for the introduction. Don't leave appealing to an audience just for an introduction. In a conclusion, you don't want to repeat yourself if you can help it. Keep your focus, I say. Don't start something totally new. Here's a place for one last appeal to pathos. The emotions or self-interest of an audience backed up by what you say in the body paragraphs of your writing. What can your audience, college students, reasonably do or think? What key idea do you want to communicate? Keep your solutions practical, not just what should happen, but what we can do or think and should do or think. The best conclusions I've seen are still reaching out to the audience while explaining writers' views. What I'm really saying is, I'm not against this, but rather I'm for. If my family, father, brother, and myself lose the ability to hunt own guns, it would be devastating since it is our favorite fall pastime. This is from that earlier student, obviously. However, the laws being proposed now largely wouldn't affect hunters, and there's no reason to fear sensible restrictions when we consider the number of people unfit to carry a gun or violent attacks. We can do something to improve the situation without taking away the experiences we treasure. This came from a hunter student of mine, Ellie, who wrote very effective, nuanced argument because she recognized there were some things that she could do and not just fall into the stereotype and stereotypical arguments that surround this topic. Those kind of papers that get beyond the simple binaries that you might see in our society about an argument, those that go beyond the either or fallacy and find a third or fourth or fifth option, which, by the way, the CQ researcher would always endorse because they're never limited to pro and con, usually have a better argument. In fact, always have a better argument because they're finding the road less traveled, and that's part of your goal. I've tried to suggest some ways in this short video of including an appeal to the audience as well as showing your own credibility to speak about a subject. Think about that seriously as you go to write your final draft, because I want to see evidence of it in your paper. Good luck.